And with continuing coverage of the CPAC conference here outside Washington, D.C., I'm joined by author Craig Shirley. He has a new book out, The Final Days of Ronald Reagan is the theme. And you are really kind of carrying the torch for Mr. Reagan, aren't you?
Well, one must do something, right? I've written now 4 books on Ronald Reagan. I intend on writing more. But I've also written about Newt Gingrich. I've written a book on World War II. I'm writing a book on Mary Ball Washington. So, keeps me off the streets and out of the pool halls.
When you hear a Ted Cruz talk about Ronald Reagan, a man who probably was, running around at 10th grade when Ronald Reagan was president, if that,
right.
Almost as if he knew him, what kind of an emotion does that draw from you?
Well, I'd rather you quote Ronald Reagan than Rutherford B. Hayes. Is that it proves that Reaganism is still alive and vibrant and vital and important in the Republican Party and in the conservative movement. And I think it's a good thing because Reaganism transcends even Ronald Reagan. Reaganism is American conservatism, and that means that is still a vital force in America, and that's a good thing. I would like to see all the candidates quote Ronald Reagan.
In a different way, the period we're in now is a lot like it was when Ronald Reagan ran for office in 1980.
Yes.
We don't have 20% interest rates, but we had a crazed liberal president.
Right.
So things are different. Security issues are different. We had the hostage crisis, et cetera, et cetera. Ronald Reagan was the man for the times. You can't see any Donald Trump being the man for the times. Who do you see is going to step in and maybe take that mantle?
I don't know. Sometimes I wonder if we're being held hostage. Instead of the Iranian hostage crisis, now 350 million Americans are being held hostage. There are similarities, but there are also vast differences too. Barack Obama is far more liberal than Jimmy Carter, number one. Number two is that where there is similarity is the fracturing of the Republican Party as it was in 1980, although it did come together at the convention in Detroit, and then Reagan, brought in the new coalition of Reagan Democrats, so he was in the process of remaking the Republican Party. And then after 12 years of Bushism, they kicked away the message and meaning and importance of Reagan conservatism. They kicked away the Reagan Democrats and put the party back in the predicament it is in today, which is it's a house divided against itself. You have the populist outsiders, the Reaganites, the libertarians, the intellectual populists on one side, and then you have basically the corrupt corporate elites on the other side. Mitt Romney is speaking today in defense of the corrupt corporate elites. It reminds me kind of like of Custer, and being surrounded by screaming Indians. Only this time it's us who are the screaming Indians. So the only solution is that the establishment's got to surrender to the vital forces of the outsiders, of the libertarian, Reaganite, populist outsiders, and listen to the reason and rationale of that side of the equation.
We're chatting with author Craig Shirley, who was active in the Reagan administration. He's written several books about our late president, most recent one, The Last Act. And Craig, if Ronald Reagan was with us now, how would he see this whole Trump phenomenon?
I think he would find it interesting. I resist trying to interpret what Ronald Reagan would do today, and I think too many people make that mistake saying, well, Ronald Reagan would do this today. They don't know. Is that all I can do is go on history, but Ronald Reagan believed he never uttered the phrase big tent, that's a misnomer. He did believe in a new Republican Party, and he said so in 1979 and 1980, that it have to reject the corporate boardroom, have to reject the country club image, have to have a place for the cop on the beat and the farmer and the police officer and the housewife. So he was calling for a populist blue collar party. So I would think he would find the Trump phenomenon interesting and at least potentially useful to the future of the conservative movement in the Republican Party.
One big difference, though, that strikes me is Ronald Reagan would never get nasty.
No.
Outside of tear down that wall,
Right.
or I'm paying for this microphone,
Right.
There was never a negative word.
Well, in public there wasn't, and he did really believe in the 11th commandment. He didn't invent it, but he embraced it very quickly in 1966, and he almost never spoke badly about in a personal sense. So in that regard, Donald Trump is vastly different, and I don't think quite useful, to the elevating of the intellectual debate of the Republican Party. And he needs to stop doing it. He needs to start getting people to think of him as a president. He needs to start talking like a president. He needs to start talking about big issues and the future and the American people. And I think actually you saw it the other night. I noticed something interesting when he was giving his press conference, which first of all, only presidents give primetime press conferences. So that was canny on his part because he wanted people to see him in that regard. The second was that he was not using first-person pronouns the way he had before. It wasn't I, me, and my. He started using the plural pronouns of we, us, and ours, which I think has been overlooked, but I think it's very significant that he's starting to think like a president.
Well, what's interesting now is what becomes of the party, the establishment that apparently is not backing Trump. But if you look at the numbers right now, and here we are on March 3rd, a lot of voting still. He has north of 300 delegates, but Cruz has north of 200 delegates. Right. It's not that far away right now.
No, it's not. And there's a long way to go. And I think everybody needs to kind of calm down before they crown Donald Trump and then knock him off his pedestal. There's still more debates to come. There's still more caucuses to come. There's still more primaries to come. And this is the most, it's probably become a tortured cliche now, but this is the most fluid election probably in the history of the Republican Party. Not since 1976, not since 1964, but maybe in history, going back to John C. Fremont in 1856.
Yeah, there's one little underreported factoid, and that is that Donald Trump is bringing a lot of non-Republicans into the primary circle. He's getting a lot of Democratic voters.
Yes, but I would say that he is not reinventing the Republican Party so much as that he's reconstituting. He's bringing the Reagan Democrats back. Reagan, as we all know, brought the Reagan Democrats in 1980 and then expanded in 1984. A lot of them were kicked away by the Bushes, both H.W. Bush and George W. Bush, because they projected a different image, they cast a different message, they weren't interested in ideas, they weren't interested in populism, and a lot of them drifted back to Bill Clinton and even Barack Obama 8 years ago. So Trump is bringing them back because he's making an appeal to them.
Let's change gears here a little bit, Craig, and talk a little bit about the Convention of States movement. Right. As you know, it's very hard to amend the Constitution. It's only been done about 27 times, and a lot of that was the Bill of Rights. Right. Is it time for things like a balanced budget amendment, for judicial terms, term limits?
I think it is a healthy, important debate to have right now is that there's always a danger to the status quo taking hold for so long because inevitably it leads to a diminution of personal freedom, it leads to corruption. The American Revolution should always be, as it properly understood, is that we are always in a state of revolt. We're always changing, we're always evolving, we're always granting more and more rights to citizenry and keeping the rights of the government in check. And I think it's a good time. I can't think of a better time right now than to start at least a very good intellectual discussion about the Convention of States.
One of the things we're trying to do here with our Liberty Playbook website is to educate people about the Constitution, about civics, right. And if we can't get the Convention of States to change things, maybe voters can.
Well, let's hope so. I mean, they certainly have it. You know, there are referendums. You know, don't forget is that the balanced budget amendment almost got through back in the late 70s and early 80s. So it was only stopped at 34, 35 states. So, and I think there's really more of a populist uprising in America today than there was in 1980.
Craig, thank you.
You bet. Thank you.
It's Craig Shirley, published author. His latest book is The Last Act, and it's looking at the final days of our former president, Ronald Reagan.